You need a map. It doesn't have to be as pretty as these, but you need one. I'll tell you why, I'll tell you how, I'll show you some tools you can use, and by the end of this, you'll know what to do, and you'll be ready to start your own. Imagine how lost you'd be without your phone giving you turn-by-turn directions to that new restaurant, that friend's house, or to meet your date. Now imagine finding those places with an old-fashioned folding paper map, so big you can't see out your windshield and impossible to ever refold. Different world, isn't it? Now imagine those places without a map. Maybe you're getting directions with landmarks, street names, and turns. Maybe not even that. Maybe it's just some old geezer at the gas station pointing and saying, "It's about 3 miles off of that way." Building a world without a map is like assembling IKEA furniture without instructions. You can do it, but it won't be fun, and there will be a lot of mistakes. And like IKEA furniture, building worlds gets easier the more you do it. The more worlds you assemble, the faster you put them together, and the more the pattern makes sense to you. So whether you're writing a book, playing Dungeons and Dragons, or creating a world for some other purpose, you'll want a map. A map shows you where things are relative to each other. It shows you what is in between and helps you remember these details and relationships. And these relationships matter. They matter a lot. Imagine a story where your brave knight has to travel quickly from Florence to Gilder. If you forgot that the Cliffs of Insanity are in between those two kingdoms, you're going to be making some embarrassing and potentially extensive rewrites. But it's not just that. For me at least, having a map is the single most important part of my creative process. I've crafted multiple worlds brimming with colorful characters, unique cultures, sprawling nations, and dynamic magic systems, and through all of these, I've found that it's the map that binds the other ingredients together. It's the map that gives the world I'm building a sense of place and identity. And most importantly, it's the map that inspires some of my greatest creative insights. Some people start with a character. Some people start with a piece of music or a powerful image. But I start with a map. The map is the key that unlocks everything else. But regardless of your process, a map is sure to help. So let's talk about how to make one. How to start. The first thing you need to do is find your North Star. And no, I don't mean draw north on the map. I mean you need to figure out the one driving idea that binds everything in your world together. The one central idea that everything else emerges from. So what is that? What is the most important thing? I'm going to talk about one of my worlds as an example. And the North Star for the whole thing was simply, I want to combine high magic and high tech, an intersection between a spacefaring empire and a medieval society that uses magic. This core concept has driven every decision I've made about this world, and we'll talk more about that later. So jot down that core idea. Write down your North Star. The second step is to think about what you want the map to illustrate. What is it going to tell you? What places are important? What relationships are important? For example, if you're plotting a murder mystery, you need to know where major events happened around the city. You need to know where important clues can be found, and a timeline is a good idea too, but that's a different conversation. A map will help you figure out how strong or weak an alibi is. It'll tell you how far our detective has to drive to get to the old Milton farm before sunset, and whether she can get there in time to stop the murderer from killing again. The same goes for a role-playing game or a fantasy novel. Where's the border between the kingdoms? Does it make sense for the friendly tribesmen to trade with that village? Is the castle close enough to the fire swamp that they need to worry about ROUSs? Maps answer these questions, and they're questions you might not think about unless you're looking at the map. Think about these kind of things. The questions you need answered and the information you need to remember will shape the kind of map you need, how much detail it might need, and clue you in on where to start. So a good idea is to make a list of 5 to 10 places that you need to show on your map. Then make a list of 3 to 5 things you don't know yet that you would like to be able to see on the map. And decide what kind of map you'll need. Is it a dungeon? Is it a city? Is it the region around a city? An entire continent? Or even an entire world? Finally, are you starting with a real place or are you inventing somewhere new? With your North Star guiding you in a list of important places, you now have a map for making your map. It's time to put down the first details. Let's talk about drawing your first map. It doesn't have to be much. My most developed world, Ahldarahd, has been around since 1997. For the kids out there, that's 27 years. It evolved from this humble little scrawl in my notebook. When I drew this during a particularly boring math class, I had no idea how far it would go. From this crude map, It evolved into an elaborate universe central to a novel I'm writing and a series of role-playing games that I've run. And that's how you should start, with a simple sketch. Draw a couple lines and mark where two of your important points are. If it's a city, put down a couple streets and a couple landmarks. If it's a region, put down a couple big geographic features, a few roads and rivers, a few cities or towns. And if you're going for a whole world, you'll probably want to draw the coastlines of your major continents first, sprinkled with a couple important cities, nations, landmarks, or the like. Don't stress about it. Don't worry about making it pretty. And don't worry about making it accurate. The details don't matter at this point. Just get those first few ideas on a piece of paper or drawn in whatever drawing program you're comfortable with. Keep it simple. A few key things, their names, and their relationships to each other. Congratulations, you now have a functional map. It might not be pretty or detailed, but it's a start. Next, fill in everything on that list you made. Need to know where Jack's house is? Write it down. Need a haunted forest? Draw some squiggly lines somewhere and now you've got a haunted forest. Need a grocery store, a castle, a lake stocked by piranhas the size of Hummers? Pick a place on your map and jot those down. Then step back and look at what you have and think about your North Star. Does your guiding idea tell you that something's wrong, that something's too big or too far away? Then just change it. That's why you're working with a sketch at this stage, so it stays loose, easy to change, easy to add to. If two of your features are too close together or too far apart, move them. If you don't have enough of something, add some more. If you don't like a name, change it. When the details start to fall into place and you're happy with it, that's when you can think about making it into a more permanent, more artistic, and likely more attractive form. At this point, you have a functional map. Look at what you have and start answering your questions. If it doesn't answer them, add more detail. If you're working on a short story or another small project, this sketch is probably all that you need. Good job, you're done. If you're working on something bigger, my suggestion is to set it aside. Go back to your writing, your world building, your role-playing game, or whatever it is that you're working on, and let your rough draft sit for a while. Add to it as you think of new things. Fiddle with it. Make little changes. If you decide you don't like the layout, tear up the whole thing and just make another one. At this point, you have a good sense of what you want represented on it, so it's easy to take that simple sketch and draw another sketch to lay it out differently. And it's your world, so do whatever you want. After a while, it'll gel. The form, the positions, the relationships, these things will solidify in your mind, and you'll see new patterns and relationships emerging that you hadn't been aware of before. And at this point, the map is working for you. It's starting to pay you back for the time you put into this simple draft. And now is when you should start to think about the next step. Do you want to take this simple sketch and turn it into something more? Remember that sketch I showed you before? That's where I started. It kicked around for a long time. A few more details, names, and places were added along the way as I needed them. Here's what it looked like in 2001. I made a fancier version in 2005 for a role-playing game. And a long time later, in 2021, it was updated using Inkarnate, and now I have a display-ready map that I'm proud to show people. Speaking of Inkarnate, let me know if you're interested in learning more about this tool. I'd be happy to make a couple tutorials on how to make maps with it. It's very easy to use, it's affordable, it's online, and it's very easy to share maps with. Another thing I like about it is it's got a very active community, and you can borrow other people's maps and make your own changes to them. So it's easy to get an already developed map as a starting place and then just add your own modifications to it. This polished map of Ahldarahd is very different from where I started, having evolved and gone through several iterations, and now it's the unifying element that ties the world together. It's the first thing I show people when introducing them to this world. And as the map has grown, so has my understanding of the place, the people who live there, and the things that are happening there. The map has enabled me to continue expanding and evolving this world for, how long was it, kids? That's right, 27 years. Give yourself a gold star. But we're talking about your map. If you want to go beyond that simple sketch, there are a plethora of tools you can use to quickly make an attractive map, even if you're not an artist, and it's very easy to draw a map by hand. So I'm going to go through some tools and give you some options here. I've used several different tools over the years. My go-to tool currently is Inkarnate. It's geared toward fantasy maps and battle maps for role-playing games. But they keep adding to it. They've been adding new libraries and new themes, and now they've added a decent science fiction library as well, so I've been using it for science fiction things. Inkarnate is web-based, so you can access your maps from anywhere, and it makes it easy to share your maps. For me, that's a big plus. It does have a yearly subscription, and for some that'll be a minus, but as these things go, it's very inexpensive. Another tool is Campaign Cartographer. This is the classic fantasy map maker, and you'll recognize its distinct style from a number of games and books. I started using Campaign Cartographer back in the 90s. Back then, it was clunky and finicky, and it took a really long time to finish a map, but it produced much prettier maps than I could draw by hand. They have a version 3 out now that is supposed to be really good, and the maps I've seen from it are stunning. I think it's a one-time purchase that runs locally on your computer, and looking at their website, I just have to say, ouch. It looks like they sell you a very basic version for quite a hefty charge, and then they upcharge you for every single feature. I can't speak to the quality or utility of this as I have not used it in a long time, but wow, do they ever charge a premium price. Looks like you're getting into $600 or $700 to actually unlock all the, quote, pro features. Another one that's popular right now is Wonderdraft. I tried this out at the same time I started with Inkarnate, and I went with Inkarnate simply because I was able to make the map I needed much faster. But it looks promising. Wonderdraft is definitely geared toward fantasy world maps. I don't think it does battle maps or cities. I don't think it has the assets for those, but it does allow you to build entire worlds very quickly, and I think it even randomly generates your continents. The end products have a lot of style options. If you play around with it a little bit, you can actually get a map that looks better than what Inkarnate will give you, just because there are more styles and more looks that you can give your map. But like I said, you can't do cities or battle maps with it. It's way less expensive than Campaign Cartographer. I guess almost everything is. And it looks like they have a couple of add-on map packs that give you additional styles and assets, but they're fairly cheap. I think they're about $5 a piece. So it's low cost with some add-ons, and I believe it's software you run on your own computer. So it's not a web or subscription based. Then there's Dungeonfog. This is another one that's very popular right now. It's very gaming centric, good for Dungeons and Dragons and other games that need battle maps. They have a free demo, then a monthly subscription, but it looks like they charge more for a commercial license if you want to publish the maps you make with Dungeonfog. And at this point, I'm giving up on it. I'm not going to look any deeper in it because this is a toxic practice I will not support. If you put in the time to create something, regardless of what tool you used, it is your intellectual property. Upcharging for the, quote, right to sell your own work commercially is a truly sleazy practice. This is absolutely disgusting, and I will not support this company. So that's a selection of fantasy maps, because I think fantasy is the most popular genre right now. If you use your own assets, a lot of these can be customized for science fiction, and some, like Inkarnate, have begun to add science fiction libraries to the assets that they provide with their tools. But what if you're working on a real-world place? What if you want to have a map that's a section of a real city? Well, there are a lot of map-making options. They seem to be geared toward presentations and building websites, but it looks like they'll work just as well for fiction and gaming. I personally don't have any experience with these, so I can't tell you anything other than, hey, these exist. But a couple that came up when I did a quick web search are Atlas and Map Creator. And for those of you who want to give it a try, you can draw your own. You don't have to use any of these tools. And drawing a map is easier than you think. You're not drawing a portrait, so you don't need a fine arts degree. You don't need any particular artistic skill at all. And there are a ton of videos on YouTube and other places to get you started, and it's a lot of fun. I don't draw maps by hand anymore just because I like to have a finished looking end product, and it takes me a really long time to draw something that detailed. Whereas if I'm just placing icons and stamped cities and mountains and things like that, I can generate a map much faster. With an electronic version, it's much easier to change. Whereas if you have to go back and edit something on a hand-drawn map, that can take a lot of work. And I'm always tinkering with my maps, so I like having something that's easy to edit. But hand-drawn maps have a unique charm, especially in role-playing games, and I've seen people do amazing maps with nothing more than a black pen and a bit of parchment paper. You can make it look aged and distressed and look like a real map that's been handed down person to person. It's awesome. It's a beautiful prop to have in a role-playing game. So if this feels like a lot, don't worry. Start simple, start with a sketch. If you're the only person using this map, there's no reason to put hours of work into it to try to make it look pretty. Just grab a notepad and sketch out the basics, boom, you have a map. And when and if you need more details, a wider area or whatever, just fill that in as you go. It'll help you keep places straight, it'll help you describe them more vividly, and will sell your readers and your players on your fictional world. My latest map is for a science fiction novel and a role-playing game that are taking place in the same universe. I've put about 4 hours into the star map. Because I'm presenting it to people, I wanted it to look good, so I've added some custom assets to it. I have another video on that if you want to check that out, how to actually make these assets and get them ready for putting in a map making tool like this. And because this map is for a game, I've added a hex grid over the top to capture the scale and show distance more accurately. If you're interested in how to make custom assets like this for your map, game, or video, check out this tutorial here. And if you want to see more videos on map building, just let me know in the comments. I'm happy to make tutorials on this kind of thing. It's something I enjoy a lot and think has a lot of value. So go out there, build your world, draw your maps, write your books, and have a great time.